Okay, well, thank you for joining me for the Arborjet Fall Update for 2019. We're going to get this started by pretty much dealing with the pests that we try to advocate for people to treat in the fall as much as possible. And honestly, the number one is the bark beetle. The western pine beetle especially, I know it sounds strange, I say it again and again, but people like to wait until spring. And the one thing we have learned against trying to fight off bark beetles is we need to get that chemical in the tree in the fall so there's plenty of time to circulate throughout the tree for when the beetles start flying come spring. Our biggest problem we have is the triage chemical that we use to treat bark beetles moves slowly through the tree. So we got to give it some time to get it moving before those beetles fly. And the other problem is we never know when spring is going to come. We've had a couple great winters where we've had a lot of snow and the beetles have kind of flown on their normal late spring, early summer schedule. But we never know what we're going to get for our winter or our spring. So with any luck, we'll get another good year of rain. But in the meantime, we still have very high populations of bark beetles in the mountains as well as in our urban forests, and we're still seeing trees die from this. So it's really important. Talk to your customers. Let them know that the bark beetle is still out there. They're still killing trees. So try and do your treatments. Try and book them for the fall if you can. The other one that is very common for treating is the mountain pine beetle. The big difference for mountain pine beetle is it carries a disease with it called blue stain fungus. This blue stain fungus can kill a tree just like the beetles can. So if you get into an area where you have mountain pine beetle with the blue stain fungus, you have to treat with both triage and the propofol to combat the disease itself. Getting up into the Groveland, Arnold area in California, we've seen a tiny bit down in the Big Bear, Lake Arrowhead area, but mostly up in the Sierras, we have seen the blue stain fungus. It's very important that they treat with both the triage and the propofol. Good news is that the hopefully soon registered triage R10 in California can be mixed with propofol, so they can be mixed together and applied at the same time. So don't hold your breath for the R10. Right now, California is looking like it's supposed to be early spring when we get it, but you never know. Right now, everyone else has it but us, as per usual. So the other one to be looking for is the IPS Engraver Beetle. This one's much harder to seed because they usually have very small pitch tubes, maybe a little frass, and they're usually attacking the top third of the tree. So if you start seeing dead branches up high or the top of the tree dying, it's probably the IPS Engraver Beetle. This one we pretty much just focus the triage on. And even though you see dead branches and the dying tip, it's still very easy to save a tree from the engraver beetle. But just know that they're probably the most prevalent beetle, and they infest quickly. So if you start seeing symptoms of an engraver beetle, you're going to see a lot of the trees surrounding have symptoms very quickly. As opposed to the western or mountain pine beetle, it takes a little bit longer for them to infest an area. And the last one is the red turpentine beetle. This one has been more prolific in the Monterey Bay area, but has been also up in the Sierras, found up through Tahoe as well. This one in particular only attacks the bottom third of the tree. And so when we're treating for this one, it's very important that they inject as low as possible on the tree. Pull back some of the soil debris and actually do the injection sites right at soil level. So that way we can get below this pest. That's the only big trick with this one. Since it doesn't fly, it doesn't get up very high on the tree. But when you see a red turpentine beetle pitch tube, it's pretty massive. So just be aware of it and make sure you're treating as low as possible specifically with this one.
No more.
I'm sorry, I didn't mention this when I started this, but if everybody could put their phones on mute so we don't accidentally talk over or anything or hear any personal conversations, that would be appreciated. So the one thing that is kind of a benefit of treating for bark beetles that most people don't realize is on the triage label, it kind of gives you rates. You have a low rate, a medium rate, and a high rate. Well, whenever we're going to bark beetles, we're always going at the medium or the high rate. The higher the rate, the longer the residual. So medium rate, 2 years. If you go at the high rate, you tend to get a longer protection with the trees. The trick is the trees have to be healthy enough to take it up. So if your tree is, that yellowing or slightly off color, you can pretty much count it out as being dead. The whole tree is off colored. It usually means the vascular system's had a lot of damage and it's no longer fully translocating the water through the system. And, of course, we joke about the fact that red is dead. So green healthy trees are the ones we want to be treating. There can be a couple signs of pitch tubes, but you don't want to see the overall health of the tree in decline. Otherwise, you will not have good vascular uptake to move the triage product. The trick is when using triage, it's also labeled for mites. So when we're dealing with spider mites, if you are treating a tree for bark beetle, you can also be wiping out the mite infestation that might be on the tree. Problem with mites, they like to come on in early spring. We don't tend to notice them until we see the damage, the off color of the tree, or the stippling on the needles where they're feeding. So a lot of times if you can get that fall application done, you're going to protect the tree from the bark beetles as well as from the spider mites that like to come out in early spring. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's kind of one of those side benefits for it. If you don't do the application in the fall, odds are if you're going up against spider mites in spring, you're going to want to switch and use Arborjet. Arborjet is much more fast-acting and can stop the feeding immediately. Whereas if you use the triage, it's going to take about 4 to 6 weeks to circulate to really stop those pests. So keep that in mind. Fall, triage for spider mites. Spring, you're better off using the Arborjet for spider mites. Okay. The other one we like to treat for in fall, and people tend to ask why, is the western oak bark beetle that causes the foamy bark canker disease. We mainly find it on the coast live oaks. But the reason why we like to treat this one in the fall is because it's better to treat and inject oak trees in the fall. We don't like to inject those oak trees in the summer. They tend to want to be in a summer dormancy, and we don't want them to be forcing to move their vascular system. So usually once fall hits, and I keep saying fall, and I should probably define fall, fall is once our hot temperatures of the summer break. That sometimes can be the end of September, early October. Usually we start getting our first rains that first week of October. That's when fall pretty much starts. And then we say fall ends before Thanksgiving. Because in California we don't have a true winter, but we do the cutoff in Thanksgiving to make sure we give enough treatment time before spring for all the chemicals to take effect. So when dealing with this particular pest and disease complex on our live oaks, you can see it's a mass attack. There's some sort of weeping or bleeding or oozing to it. It does look very similar to the invasive shothole borer, but this is specific to the oaks. We actually use triage to combat the pest itself, the beetle that's boring in. And then we use propofol to combat the fungal infection, the foamy bark canker disease, also known as geosmithia. In this case, it's not the beetle that really kills the tree, but vectors the disease. So we want to kill the vector so it doesn't spread. But we have to treat the disease because, as you can see, it's literally going through and girdling the vascular tissue of the tree. So that being said, you always want to do the combination treatment of both triage and propofol for this particular pest. So right now it's been mainly detected in our coastal areas, but I have to update this. We now have Madeira, Mariposa, Tuolumne, Calaveras, Amador. They all have the pest as well. So it started in the coast and then has been moving inland into our foothills as well. So the other one we want to treat for our oak trees, preferably in the fall, are our deer worms, the tussock moth and the oak worm. And I have found there has been some confusion on who is who. So as you can see, on the left is your tussock moth. The reason why this one is an issue is because you can see all those little hairs. They're actually an allergen for a lot of people. So if you touch these, you tend to react, break out. So this one doesn't occur as often or as many cycles as the oak worm. We tend to see this one pop out late February, sometimes a little later, sometimes a little earlier, depending on when our spring is. But you can usually identify the egg masses, the cocoons on the trees themselves prior to when they actually come out. So you have kind of a heads up and a warning that they're on a tree. But the timing is really key when it comes to treating these pests, and here's the reason. Triage will work on caterpillars. So triage will work on both these pests. Problem is, these pests can devour trees very quickly, and it takes triage about 4 to 6 weeks to get through a tree. So if you see the pest and you inject the triage, they're going to have the tree half devoured before the triage spreads. If you're dealing with oakworm, it's the exact same thing, but it can happen a couple times a year. So if you can do your injections in fall, that will protect the trees for 2 years against caterpillars, and you don't have to worry about timing come spring. However, if you get that call, because usually you don't find out you have it until the customer calls and says there's worms raining down on us, then you need to actually start the application with AceJet. AceJet will get through that tree in 24 to 48 hours, and as soon as the pests feed on it, they die. So they start dropping out of the tree almost immediately. And so that being said, if the pest infestation is already present, you're going to want to do the AceJet. You can inject the triage right behind the AceJet, same day, same time, so that way you then get the long residual as well. But you have to lead with the AceJet first to get that initial stock down to get those pests to stop from feeding on the tree. So that's one question I tend to get every spring, so I try and send out reminders. If you know you have a property that has them and you're constantly treating for them, go ahead, do your applications in the fall, and you don't have to worry about your timing come spring. The last one for oaks that we like to do in the fall is sudden oak death. Pretty much this one is, how do I put it? It's out there. It's spread all throughout the Bay Area and Marin, and it's now down and into San Francisco counties. It's moving east throughout the East Bay of California. So be on the lookout for it. We had a very wet, warm last rains at the end of the spring, which tends to indicate we're going to have a high rate of infection of this disease this year and spreading. So keep that in mind. Do your applications now. We want to do them in the fall again because that's the best time to do the oak trees. And when you do the injection of the phosphorus, so you can see most of the recommendations out of Berkeley has been with Reliant or AgriPhos. Phosphojet is the exact same product. They're all very, very similar, just slightly different labels. And those injections will last 2 years. That's been kind of a misconception a bit. People thought they were needing to inject them every year to protect them. But the recommendation out of UC Berkeley is you have to do a spark spray every year, but trunk injection is done every 2 years. So that gets us using a lot less chemical out there, especially when we're doing large applications. And if you happen to run into a tree that's actually infested with sudden oak death, trunk injection has a better chance of actually preserving the tree. It's not a great chance. It's still only about 25%, but it's your chance at saving the tree. All right. So I got to talk about the invasive shot-hole borer really quick because I have people from up and down the state on this call. And those of you in Southern California are well-versed in the invasive shot-hole borer. You know about this boring beetle that brings in a fungus that can reproduce every about 6 weeks. Northern California, we're still introducing this to everyone. They're learning about this one and keeping their eyes open for it. With this particular pest, our treatment protocol has been the injection of insecticide and a fungicide. Insecticide for the vectoring beetle, fungicide for the fungus the beetle carries with it and feeds on. So in this case, again, we're using the triage and the propofol to combat this particular pest. It does last as a treatment for 2 years. However, it's kind of a hard stop at 2 years. You don't want to try and stretch this out to 3 years if you already have an infestation. And if you're doing this completely preventatively where you don't have any actual attacks on the tree yet, you can get away with just using the triage product. So keep that in mind. We like to let people know that they can do just the insecticide. However, once the fungus is introduced, you really do need to be adding the propofol product in there as well. So the biggest thing about this guy that I always try to reiterate is remember it reproduces very quickly. So identify it fast. Look at all the different life stages, know what it looks like, and try and get a treatment process going as quickly as possible so you stay ahead of the pest and not behind. Because you can see in this slide here, there's mass attacks that occur, And after a tree gets hit with so much disease infection, it will clog up its vascular tissue just as badly as the holes will create gaps in the vascular tissue. This is what it looks like when the pest just bores in. They're nice round holes. They're about the size of the lead of a mechanical pencil. Keep in mind with this one in particular, there's always some sort of weeping or bleeding associated with it because of that fungal infection. So you'll kind of tend to notice on the main trunk of the tree, or you'll see it up in the main leader branches on the tree. It'll look like more of a dripping type symptom to it. So with that, I'm not going to skip ahead too far on this one just yet. This one in particular is a pest that sometimes is heavily present and sometimes almost goes dormant. This one kind of started out in the Whittier Narrows, Huntington Beach, and for some reason it's making a resurgence in the Whittier Narrows. So keep your eyes open on this one. We've heard it's been kind of dormant, not moving too much, but if you can treat where you find infestations, definitely take care of it because it can resurge. All right. The next beetle I want to talk to you about that's all up and down California now that came to us from the Pacific Northwest is the bronze birch borer. This one kind of snuck in. Nobody was really noticing it. And the next thing we knew, it was all throughout entire California. Birch trees were dying, and we all assumed it was because of drought. Turns out this little flathead borer was the one speeding along their deaths. So this one likes to attack stressed birch trees. It bores in. It makes the galleries. When the adult leaves, it makes what we call a D-shaped exit hole because it is a flat-headed borer. This one can be treated with both imidacloprid or triage. Flathead borers respond very well to imidacloprid. However, if you're in a high infestation, you've already got a tree dying and dead, and you have larvae in other trees, that's usually too high of an infestation for imidacloprid to completely knock it out, at which point we'll say don't use the Arborjet product, switch over to the triage product. It does better at those heavy infestations. But keep in mind, if you choose to use the Arborjet, it's going to last about a year. If you're going to use the triage, it's going to last, minimum of 2 years. So stay ahead of this one. Once this pest tends to get into the main trunk of the tree, very hard to save a tree at that point. So if you start seeing a dead branch in a birch, look close. You might see this D-shaped exit hole, at which point you know you have the bronze birch borer and you need to start treating. It pretty much shows up in all different types of birch trees. And I've had some people use the azadirachtin product, or azosol. Just know that the timing is critical on that one. You really have to know when your flight is because azadirachtin is only really active in the tree for about 6 months. So you got to make sure you have it in there active when that pest is out and flying. So I tend to say stay with the imidacloprid or the triage. All right. This is another one that is hitting people's radars. Again, it's a beetle vectoring a disease. This one is thousand cankers disease. I just got a call out of the Modesto area where we have another sighting of this disease. Essentially, it only hits the black walnut, and it has this tendency of showing a dead branch up at the top, something where you might think from a distance, oh, maybe it's wind damage or something of that nature. That's just usually where the beetle starts vectoring in the disease. Once it starts attacking, it's an ambrosia beetle, so there's thousands of hits on it. And each time it attacks, it introduces a small amount of another type of Geosmithia infection. And again, it girdles the tree and kills it. It actually kills these black walnuts pretty fast, 6 months to 3 years at most, and it'll take out the black walnut. So we treat this one with triage, and we treat it with propofol. I tend to say as soon as you identify it, you should be treating. But the reason why we put it down as a fall application is because these trees are sensitive to the combination of triage and propofol. So if you do it in the heat of summer, you can sometimes get marginal burning. So that's why we tend to say wait and do it in the fall if you can. It's best for the tree for health-wise for treating this particular disease and pest. Dutch elm disease is the other one that has been cropping up more and more. I don't know if you guys out there remember Dutch elm disease, but I've been getting a lot of phone calls with people saying they have fire blight in their elm trees. We don't get fire blight in our elm trees. If you see something that looks like fire blight in your elm tree, it is most likely Dutch elm disease. This is spreading throughout Sacramento, San Jose, It just showed up in Anaheim. So keep in mind, it's pretty much throughout the state. It's making a resurgence. This one is vectored by a beetle, so we can treat the beetle to stop the vector. But again, it's really the disease that's the most virulent part. That's what's really killing the tree, is the disease itself. So some people, once a tree already has such elm disease, they inject it with the propiconazole or propazole, and they can maintain the tree. And they tend to choose not to use the insecticide because, one, it's much more expensive, and two, it's already infected. They're not worried about it vectoring more. So with that being said, a lot of times people will just treat with the propazole to suppress the disease. The trick is these elm trees can graft their roots. So if you have another elm tree nearby, not only can a beetle vector it, but also the roots can graft and vector the disease. So keep that in mind when dealing with one in particular. But this is what it looks like. You start getting the dead branches. It's kind of that same shepherd's hook where the leaves stay on the branch. But if you go ahead and cut it, you can actually see that black infection in the vascular system. And then if you look close, sometimes you'll actually see the beetles that have vectored it. Nice little round holes that bring it in. So I don't have too many people who actually use triage to combat the beetle on this one because it can spread so much easier through with the trees. So a lot of people just use the propazole. But once you get a tree infected, you pretty much have to keep injecting it to protect it. So it becomes almost an annual application on these trees. Okay, Sycamore Scale. This is another fall application because if you wait till spring to do it, you'll still have signs and symptoms of the pest. So it's really easy to take care of Sycamore Scale. You just do an application of imidacloprid. We inject in the fall with Arborjet. You can even do a soil drench in the fall of imidacloprid, and it'll really help clean it up. The problem I tend to see is a lot of people don't identify Sycamore Scale. So it's very simple. Just go out to the tree around noon, look up through the canopy. If you see a bunch of dots and spots and holes on the leaves, odds are you have Sycamore Scale. So go ahead, treat it in the fall. You'll have nice, healthy-looking leaves come spring. Same thing for anthracnose. It's a fall application. If you wait till spring, you're still going to get the signs and symptoms of the disease. So if you're dealing with the western sycamore, you can do phosphorus injection in the fall, clean it up and make it look nice come spring. If you're dealing with pretty much any other tree type, including London plane trees, you're going to want to inject propazole in the fall. The active ingredient is propiconazole. That one will suppress anthracnose in ash, elms, oaks, and London plane trees. But just know the phosphorus works best only on the western sycamore. And why would I just not use propazole on the western sycamore as well? Is because we've seen a lot of these trees also getting Botrysphaeria canker. And so if I do phosphorus for anthracnose, I know I'm going to take care of Botrysphaeria canker as well. So if I can use it, I will. So that's kind of the whole reasoning there. The other recommendation we tend to say for fall is the eucalyptus trees. I know I have very few people out there injecting eucalyptus trees. I know it. Save one for me, please. But anyway, we use imidacloprid, Arborjet, and we use it on the ellipsillid, the tortoise beetle, the longhorn beetle, and the bronze bug in Southern California. It works great on all four, but the trick is, and why we say fall, is because they flower in spring for a very diverse time period. So it's better to just go ahead and do your injection in the fall, get ahead of it when you don't have flowering, and you don't have to worry about your timing. And it'll protect that tree for a year against all these pests and clean it up and stop the leaf drop. That's probably going to be the number one complaint I get is the leaf drop from the pest infestations. So they're the ones causing the leaves to drop. So if you have customers complaining about it, treat the trees and you'll take care of the leaf drop. All right. The other fall application I like to do is for black diamond scale. Not sure how many of you guys are familiar with it. Not inherent in its name. It is not actually a scale, but it is a fungal infection. And it happens on our fan palms. It mainly shows up on the California fan palm, not the Mexican fan palm. But if you happen to get a couple that hybridize, it'll show up there as well. And it looks like there's scales on the frond, essentially. But that's not, nope. That's actually the fungal infection. Those are the spores there. And we inject it with phosphorus. And we want to do it in the fall because we want to do it in low temperatures. We don't ever want to inject palm trees when it's hot. They're very susceptible to burning. So inject your phosphorus. The new fronds that come out will become clean. Don't remove the old fronds. You don't have to worry about the old fronds reinfesting the new ones. You want them to grow out. Once they drop below that 45-degree angle, go ahead, you can chop them off. But you want to maintain them as long as you can. That way they're still giving the nutrients to the new fronds. Gold-spotted oak borer. So this guy's been on the move recently. I don't know if you've heard it in the news. But he's moving. He's expanding his territory. And the reason why we tend to do him in the fall is, again, it's an oak tree. And we really do try and do all of our oak applications in the fall if we can, early spring if we need to. In this case in particular, we either use Arborjet or triage against this particular pest. We have more research on the Arborjet because it's easier to get a year's worth of research as opposed to 2 years' worth of research. But we do know triage will work as well, if not better, over a 2-year period for this particular pest. And with oaks, the less holes we can drill in them, the better. So if we know we're going up against this particular pest, we tend to say go ahead, do the fall application of triage, and protect it for 2 years. Now, I'll say this, inherent in its name, it's got the 6 gold spots on its back, but honestly, I've never seen a gold-spotted oak borer in the wild. I've seen them in traps, I've seen them in labs, but I've never just seen one flying around and land on a tree. So don't wait until you see the pest. You're going to be looking for dying oaks, and then you're going to be looking again for that exit hole, that D-shaped exit hole. That's the telltale on this guy. He's another one of our flat-headed borers. So if you happen to see a dead and dying tree, get up close, see a D-shaped exit hole, and you might be dealing with this gold-spotted oak borer. So stay on top of this one, because for some reason he's moving a lot more this past year. Okay, and mainly for those of you in the South, let's review the South American palm weevil. But don't disregard this for the rest of the state, guys, because this one is going to get shipped very easily. A lot of times when they like to send these palm trees, they tie them up and they send them out. Well, if they tie up a palm tree with one of these guys in the canopy, you're not going to know it's there until it, probably dies, unfortunately. But the South American palm weevil is right now down in the kind of San Diego, El Centro area, but it's spreading. And it's going to be on a truck very soon, probably up to Northern California if we're not careful. So pay attention to it. The easiest way to identify it, honestly, is by the notches it eats into the fronds. So if you see a new frond coming out and it's got some weird geometric notches in it, odds are it's this guy, the South American palm weevil. Right now we're mainly using imidacloprid against it, so Arborjet. It moves faster when you inject it into the tree, so that's what a lot of the recommendations have been. However, if you're doing preventative, a soil drench of imidacloprid will work as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Right now the protocol is Arborjet, and if you're doing it preventively, you really should be kind of looking at fall applications, because like I said, we like to inject our palms in cooler temperatures, and so fall is an ideal time for the treatments. All right. Not last but not least, but yeah, we got aphids. The reason why I put aphids on here is just to get everyone thinking ahead of, yes, aphids come out in the spring. Yes, we can treat them in the spring. But, hey, if you can get ahead of the work and plan for it and take that off your spring to-do list, go for it. Treat those trees you know who always get aphids in the fall. It'll protect it for the entire year, and you don't have to worry about that infestation come spring. So just my little quip there for planning ahead. The other one we like to do in the fall is our nutrient treatments. A lot of times when we're injecting trees, we're doing the micronutrients. If you inject a high rate of manganese and iron into a newly leafed out tree, you can pretty much burn and scorch those new leaves. So fall is the ideal time. There's no chance of doing that. And you don't have to worry about the tree using up the nutrients. Essentially what it's going to do, it's going to hold the nutrients through winter, and when it leaves out come spring, it's going to be a nice, new, healthy, beautiful tree. Unless you're dealing with maples, especially autumn blaze maples, just throwing out there, they like to compartmentalize. You'll get like a 99.9% nice, beautiful green tree and one branch that's still yellow. Don't ask me why. They're just notorious for it. You can even re-inject the tree. That branch will still be yellow. You pretty much have to inject at the base of that branch to make it turn green. Strangest thing I've ever seen, but I've only seen it on maples. So when we're doing our treatments, keep in mind, a lot of times, one treatment will last 2 years. So this is just an example of a severely chlorotic tree, and drought-stressed tree, one injection, you can see the first year it came back. By the second year, it was still using those nutrients and still looking good. We tend to say you have to come back and maybe retreat the tree probably every 2 to 3 years, depending on how bad the soil conditions are or how alkaline the water is you're using. So use that time in between to try and amend the soil and see if you can free up some of those micronutrients, because those are very, very key for tree health, more so than macronutrients. So keep that in mind. Micros are key. You can also do palm injection in the fall for their nutrients. This is just a really quick synopsis of some of the nutrient deficiency symptoms. Note the bottom right, boron deficiency. You get a lot of crinkling, a lot of bending. Sadly, boron toxicity looks almost identical. So if you do see a palm kind of meristem starting to kind of crumble and crinkle and bend and fall over, you probably want to get a soil test done to see where your boron levels are. But otherwise, giving a palm the nutrition it needs will keep it healthy and growing straight and having beautiful fronds without a lot of windburn symptoms. So we tend to say inject with Palmjet in the fall or early spring, again, when the temperatures are cooler. And it's very simple, really quick. You can inject palm multiple ways. You can do the standard drill plug and inject, or you can do drill and put the stinger needle in and inject it that way, depending on the type of palm. But if you guys have any questions on palm injections, give me a call. More than happy to help with that one because it's a little different than our standard trunk injection process. So looking ahead to early spring, these are the main chemicals we're using for our insecticides, our triage, our Imajet, our AceJet, and our azosol. I did mention the triage G4, but like I said, we might have it for early spring. Don't hold your breath just in case. But the azosol, keep this one on your radar. This is the one that if you're dealing with, Mrs. Smith's roses and there's white flies and thrips and everything else, it's OMRI, it's organic, and it's a wonderful spray, drench, or fumigated application for getting rid of some of those more soft-bodied pests. AceJet, we refer to as the 911. Remember, fast-acting, 24 to 48 hours, knocks most different pest types out of the tree. So 911. Imajet, that's your imidacloprid. That's the one that we're going to be using on most of our sucking piercing pests or flat-headed borers. There is also the Imajet 10, which basically is just a 10% solution, higher concentration. It makes for a faster application. I tend to use this on our huge eucalyptus trees where I have to put in like 30 injection sites. So keep that in mind. It's a good option there. Standard triage, you guys all know it. Anything that bores into the tree or physically eats the leaves, and it lasts about 2 years in the tree. And then, last but not least, we have Triage G4. This is our caution label one. It's identical to Triage, except for it's a caution label. It's still a 4%. It still lasts 2 years, but we got rid of that restricted use federally. I'm running out of time, so I'm scanning through all this. Phosphojet, Propofol are the two fungicides. Honestly, I have a whole disease presentation on just Phosphojet and Propofol for different disease types. So feel free to pull that up in our video library, and you can see all the different applications for these two products. And then remember, we got to water and then do our applications and water. Since all these are systemic, we got to make sure we have water in the system to get it moving through the tree. And then last but not least, I'm just going to talk about shortstop really fast, and the reason being is it's not an injection, it's a soil drench, but this is something we can be using for some of our fungal and topical infections. So I know that sounds strange. It's a tree growth regulator, but it actually helps reduce fungal infections by thickening the cuticle layer. So we've been using this a lot on our powdery mildew infections in oaks and sycamore trees. So it's one of those thinking outside the box. It does reduce the canopy growth and stimulate root growth. So you do get about 2 years of control on canopy growth. But it's a product that we started using more just because of drought reasons and the fungal applications for it as well. So if you have any questions on shortstop, let me know. There's a whole lot more to this product, and it deserves its own complete webinar on it, to tell you the truth. So maybe that'll be my next webinar on it. So that's my contact information. Hopefully you guys already have it. But any questions you might have, I'm going to open this up now. Oh, I'm going to open it up now. There we go. To see if there's any questions going on. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you for everyone who attended. I'm going to stop the recording now to see if anybody's put any questions in, or they can ask on the phone line.